Welcome everyone to a special edition of the virtual office hours today. My name is John Fia. I teach history here at Messiah College and I am the chair of the history department, and as some of you know, we've been doing these YouTube videos related to history and the humanities now for at least a year now. We're going on our second semester. We started up again last week. We did our first one. So we'll return to our usual schedule going through the discipline of history and what it means to think as a historian. We'll get back to that next week. But we have a special guest today. It's a very special episode, if you will, of the virtual office hours. With us today is Dr. Geoffrey Harpham from the National Humanities Center in the Research Triangle in North Carolina, right around Duke, North Carolina State, that area. He is here to give the keynote address, actually, tonight for the Messiah College Center for Public Humanities Humanities Symposium. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the ideas I think he's going to talk about tonight. So we are thrilled to have him here. We're thrilled he's at Messiah, and he has been gracious enough to give us some time here on the virtual office hours to talk a little bit about the humanities and his work in promoting the humanities. So welcome, Geoffrey. Tell us, I'm guessing most of the people who are going to be watching this video have never heard of the National Humanities Center. Tell us what that is and what what you do.
Well, of course, I'm trying to change that.
Okay, of course. That's why you're here, right?
That's right. The National Humanities Center is a research institute. Primarily, it provides residential fellowships to scholars who come from all over the year for a one-year residency. And during that time, they pursue their own scholarly projects. They have no committee meetings. They have no students.
Sounds good.
They have no assignments. They have optimal conditions for creativity. We try to provide them with everything that a person would need by way of support, and the results are, to my eyes, pretty compelling. We've had about 1,350 scholars in the course of our 35-year history, and our library of books written at the center contains about 1,350 volumes, so it's a very high rate of productivity. Also, we have professional development programs for high school teachers where we take the knowledge generated by scholars and put them into contact with high school teachers. We run a series of online seminars that reach over 1,000 teachers a year, and if you do the math, I think that's actually a couple of 100,000 high school students who benefit each year from our work in professional development. And then thirdly, we run typically multi-year, multidisciplinary, multi-dimensional initiatives that seek to bring attention to some subject of public concern to which the humanities can contribute. We ran one for 3 years on the subject of the human, where we brought humanists and scientists together to talk about the ways in which empirical science was reconfiguring our understanding of the human. And we're right now engaged in a 3-year project on human rights in the humanities, where we bring humanists into conversation with legal scholars and policy people and a wide range of disciplines from all over the world.
Okay. How is this organization funded? Is it it's funded by private donors? Does it have federal sponsorship?
Well, despite the name, it doesn't have any official federal sponsorship. We do get some support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, but we've got to apply for it just like anybody else. And we have some grants, and we have an endowment that we are constantly laboring to increase.
Okay, great. I think I had some friends a few years, well, I don't know if this was before your tenure or not, who did one of those teacher seminars, the one on religion in America. I think it was Christine Heyerman, Grant Wacker, and
I know them both.
Randy Ballmer, I think were the three. And they both had high praise. I was a little jealous. It sounded like a great, as someone who does American religion and those kinds of things. Now, you are obviously an advocate for the humanities. Your discipline is you're a literary critic. You're a scholar in an English department for most of your career at Tulane. So obviously you're an ideal person to promote this thing called the humanities. I find most of the students who come to Messiah College, or most of the people who think about humanities related disciplines, don't normally think about the word humanities. They think about the discipline: history, English, philosophy, foreign languages, and those kinds of things. Can you give us your short definition, if that's possible? What are the humanities? I mean, how would you define the humanities?
So it's actually a very deep question.
I
It's
know
a
it
simple
is.
question, but a very
Yeah, I
deep
know it
question.
is, yeah.
And your students are not alone. Most of the academics that I know, and I know many,
Mhm.
actually don't like to think of themselves as humanists. They prefer to think of themselves as specialists in
Right.
one discipline or another, and that's quite natural. And you could say that the humanities are nothing more than a kind of administrative grouping to
Mhm.
provide a counterbalance to
Sure.
math and natural science on one hand and social science on the other. The third
Mhm.
leg of the stool is the humanities. And in a sense, that's accurate. But in another sense, it's inaccurate because the humanities reach back. They have roots that spread all over, and they go very, very deep. The ultimate origin is probably the classical world, where a certain kind of learning was developed.
Mhm.
But there was also a medieval Renaissance, early Renaissance of classical learning at the Italian universities in the 15th century, and this retrieval was again retrieved at Oxford through the Literae Humaniores in the 19th century. The 19th century, in fact, was a very rich period for what subsequently became called the humanities through the thinking of John Henry Cardinal Newman and
Mhm.
Matthew Arnold, where humanities disciplines began to focus on the cultural history of humankind. And then all of these currents and others came into some kind of focus in the American Academy in the late 19th and early 20th century through what was called the New Humanism, which was still not a set of academic research disciplines as much as it was a kind of cultural orientation.
Mhm.
And then the key moment, and what I'll be talking about in my lecture later on tonight, was the post-World War II moment in the United States, when the concept of general education came into focus.
Mhm.
And through a couple of very distinctive and authoritative texts, the concept of the humanities suddenly crystallized as a crucial part of the curriculum of general education, really the heart and soul of the curriculum.
Okay.
This was where the ideas of history and tradition and culture came into focus, and there was also a kind of moral holdover from the 19th century. These were thought to be the disciplines in
Yeah,
which
sure.
the character of students was improved, and while many people
Mhm.
were kind of embarrassed by that because they didn't see themselves as shepherds to the soul, they
Right,
saw
right.
themselves as scholars. Still, there is, even today, some sense that there is an aspect of human betterment that is addressed by the humanities, just not addressed by many of the other disciplines. So it's a very complicated
It
subject, and it's easier to give you a long answer than it is to
That's
give you a
true.
short one.
That's true. Well, I'm sure we won't edit anything out. We'll respect the depth of the complex answer. Tonight, as I said, Dr. Harpham is going to be speaking, giving his keynote address. The title of the address, and I'm embarrassed to say my copy of his book is from interlibrary loan. It's not my copy. I'm going to buy a copy, but I happen to borrow it from someone who interlibrary loaned it. So I don't know if we can zoom in or, well, let's just leave it like that. The Humanities and the Dream of America. And chapter 6 of that book is entitled, make sure I get it right, Melancholy in the Midst of Abundance, How America Invented the Humanities. The Humanities Symposium this year is focused on the subject of wealth and abundance, thus making Dr. Harpham's work, especially this chapter, a very applicable topic. Now, having read this chapter and looking forward to your talk tonight, I know you're going to talk about the post-war era, but as an early Americanist historian and as someone who devotes themselves to American history here in this series of videos, I couldn't help but love the way you started the essay with this quote from John Adams. Maybe I'll let you elaborate on that. But you mentioned in your chapter that for the Founding Fathers, and especially John Adams, I'll quote you here, active interest in the humanities was the culmination of and reward for successful nation building. What is the relationship between this experiment we know as America, this nation that these Founding Fathers created, and the humanities? I got another complex question, right? But yeah.
I'll give it a go. There's a letter that is famous among all humanists written by John Adams to his wife in 1780, but the sentiments And some of the same words, Adams also wrote into the Massachusetts Constitution
Yeah,
later on.
1780,
That's
yeah.
right. And he said, I study politics and warfare so that my sons can study naval architecture and other disciplines, so that
Right.
their sons can study poetry, porcelain, tapestry, and music.
Right. The quote is now up on the screen. You're reading it right now. We'll have it up there. Go ahead.
I'm a little unclear about
Yeah,
what
right.
the sons were supposed to be studying, but I know
Right.
that grandsons were supposed to be studying. And it's a striking vision because it projects a kind of natural evolution from a race of warriors to a race of kind of dilettantes, people who are appreciating things. But there's actually a pretty robust conception of human nature that I think he's implying there. What he's saying is that it fell to my generation to sort out the big, laborious, difficult, sometimes violent issues of the day. But this is not human nature itself. Human nature, if freed from want and necessity, has a different trajectory. And he sees a progressus in which eventually we will have sorted out all of our circumstances. We will be at peace with ourselves and with the world. We will have settled our cities. We will have cultivated our farms. And then human nature can express itself as it wishes to. And the natural result of this will be that we take an interest in what he would consider higher things, finer things, things where you appreciate, or a state of mind in which you appreciate things for their qualities of beauty. You could complain that this is still an elitist vision, and it definitely is, but you can see that there's actually an account of human nature there that is quite striking, and I'd say it's distinctively American.
Sure. Has this played out? Has Adams's vision, from where you sit, has it been successful? Have we become a nation that has managed to enjoy the beauty and the contemplation and the
Well, it might not seem so. Sitting in the waste of popular culture.
Right.
But to a far greater extent than Adams's generation was able to.
Sure.
Where it was a tiny number of people who had any leisure time whatsoever and the means to enjoy it. Books.
Sure.
A great many people have developed interests and tastes that I think would conform to Adams's vision.
I'm thinking here of, as I listened to you talk, I was thinking of another founder, Ben Franklin, right, who retires at the age of 42, so that he can go forth and read and collect and develop libraries and work, experiment with science and these kinds of things.
I think it's indisputable that anybody, although their circumstances might discourage this, anybody has a natural curiosity. The past is a natural magnet for that curiosity. And the doings of human beings, the cultural productions of human beings are interesting to us in a way that's undeniable. And I also think that people of all kinds, no matter what their training or background or level of sophistication or anything, respond to beauty. They respond to powerfully conceived and executed artifacts. There's a kind of instinct for it that I think we...
Would sort of stories fall into that as well?
Stories definitely fall.
That we tell as literature and historians, literary scholars.
Narrative understanding and linguistic complexity. I think these are counted as positive. I noticed that leaders of all countries tend to be the best storytellers, from the most kind of unmodern or pre-modern societies all the way up to our society. The people who rise to positions of leadership tend to be really good narrators.
I'm going to go off script a little bit, but it's something that we talked about earlier, and that you mentioned that. One of the things we're really interested in the history department is to get people to think about the way they can use the humanities in a variety, history in our case, in a variety of different fields, right? Not just historians don't just become historians. Tell the story that you told about the board member from Wachovia Bank, and the point you made about sort of accountants and, rising up the, leading companies and so forth.
That's right. Well, this is a gentleman I met when I first came to the National Humanities Center, because he was on the board of trustees. John Medlin was his name, and at that time he was head of Wachovia Bank. And he'd been named National Banker of the Year in 1991-92, not because his bank was so spectacularly aggressive or because it was gobbling up other banks, just because everything that it did quite well and had extraordinary customer service record and great deal of customer satisfaction. And he was admired by his peers as a model of what a banker of that generation could and should be. And I asked him about his career one day, and he said that he got out of the military, I think it was the Navy, and he went looking for a job. He had no particular aspirations to be a leader, he just wanted a job. And he took an accounting course and then got a job at Wachovia Bank in Winston-Salem. And he said that while he was an accountant, all he was thinking about was accounting. But he was a good accountant, and eventually he was placed in charge of other accountants. And with people under him, people reporting to him, he had to think about human relations and human interactions, and psychology came into play in addition to his accounting. And then he was made a district manager, which meant that he had banks in several different regions, and he had to think about sociology a little bit. In other words, he's making his way through the social sciences, having started with accounting. And then eventually he became the head of the entire bank, which had branches all over the place. And he said when he became head of a large, complex organization, all of a sudden he had to start thinking about philosophy and history, and literature was a guide. In other words, he made his, that's right. He made his way up the curriculum in his professional life, culminating with the humanities.
That's amazing.
And that is what led him to become a member of the Board of Trustees of the National Humanities Center and a supporter of colleges and universities throughout the state. It wasn't his training, it wasn't his college training, it wasn't his orientation, it was his professional career.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think one of the fascinating things you also mentioned, right? You said, accountants tend to continue to be accountants, and they don't rise if they don't bring in the sort of humanities that helps them develop leadership skills and so forth. So excellent. One of the subtitle of this chapter 6 and the subtitle of your talk, and you may have answered this a little bit with the John Adams question, but this very provocative for me phrase, that Americans invented the humanities. Now you just described the humanities as sort of going back, a long way before 1776 or 1607 or whatever you want. What do you mean by that? I'm really, is this a sort of some kind of an argument for an American exceptionalism, or what is it about America that invented the humanities?
It is an argument for American exceptionalism, although I would avoid any kind of dualistic...
Absolutely, yeah. So would we at Messiah College, if you'd have a hard time finding a flag around here even, right? But yeah, go ahead.
But what I described in that very abbreviated history I gave you was the roots of the humanities, but the kinds of learning that I was talking about did not conceive of themselves as the humanities. I'm not talking about America having invented philosophy or literature. I'm talking about America having invented an academic category called the humanities, which had assigned to it certain functions, certain educational functions, which bore certain burdens. And the post-World War II moment that I function on was a time of high focus and concentration when the humanities, these disciplines, were essentially assigned the task of creating citizens of a mature democracy, that is self-governing, self-regulating citizens who appreciated the higher things, who had the kind of mental freedom and flexibility that you would hope that citizens of a democracy would have. And it was the humanities that specifically were assigned the task of producing those citizens. The other disciplines could teach people, their skills, their information, but it was the humanities that had this nation-building task assigned to them.
Now, what does this mean then, sort of wrapping up here, what does this mean then for, I'm sure you listened to Barack Obama's State of the Union address, this call for government funding of the STEM disciplines, for those of you unfamiliar, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, that the future of America lies in these kinds of disciplines as we sort of compete in a global market and so forth. In light of this original vision, say, of John Adams, in light of the very compelling idea that America, the humanities and American identity go hand in hand, or American democracy go hand in hand, what is your reaction? Or what should any sort of humanist, how should they respond to, all of this call for the STEM disciplines, the practical disciplines, the utilitarian disciplines, as opposed to those humanities disciplines, which, you know, if you're right, and I think you are at the foundation of, you know, our republic in some ways. Yeah.
Well, I think that the president's emphasis on the STEM disciplines represents a misunderstanding, and I regret it. I've been trying to think of an acronym that would include an H. A lot of very smart people have put their heads around this.
That's right.
Nobody's come up with anything really good yet, but I think that the humanities represent that, you know, what transforms an information-based curriculum into an education for democracy. And without it, you lack that dimension. I noticed that the president doesn't seem willing to spend any political capital in defense of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And in fact, this despite the fact that he has a very intuitive grasp of the liberal arts and the humanities. His sensibility is very humanist. You can't read Dreams from My Father without feeling that this man is a born writer.
Or he's citing, you know, Stonewall and Selma, and at the inauguration, and he has a deep understanding of this.
Bill Clinton was another one who had a very, very solid understanding, a remarkably good understanding of the humanities. And yet, the most successful attack on the National Endowment for the Humanities was made in his administration. And all we can say right now is that the NEH survives, but the future of the humanities is not bound up with the National Endowment for the Humanities. That's just a kind of weather vane. What I would point out to the president, if I had him sitting in this chair right now, is that the large concept in which the humanities take their place is liberal education. Mass liberal education is one of the greatest ideas this country has ever had, and it escapes our attention because no individual ever had it. It just emerged through the force of events in our history. But it is the secret for our dynamism, it's the secret for our creativity, it's the secret for our democracy. And when I see liberal education today imperiled, I see danger signs of a number of kinds. Because I think that if we get away from the idea of mass liberal education, we also get away from the idea of social mobility, where everybody has a shot. We get away from the idea of the free intellect, where everybody is free to explore their own life path for themselves. And we get closer to the idea of streaming people into certain occupations. A very uncreative concept. I've been to China twice in the last year, and I have spoken to the presidents and provosts and deans and faculties of 5 of the leading universities in China. And what strikes me is that they feel that they are being outcompeted by the United States. We sometimes feel that we're being in danger of being outcompeted by the Chinese, and they think that the reason is that the Chinese educational system is not liberal enough. So they're making dramatic advances in the field of what they would call comprehensive education, so they can catch up with us. And the key element is the liberal arts education that instructs a student in how to think in different ways. In other words, not how to solve problems, but how to think in different ways. When you go to the history classroom and you think as an historian, you go to the music classroom, you think as a musician, you go to the chemistry classroom. And the result is, not only do you know a lot or a little about a lot of subjects, but you understand what it is to think in different ways. This is the key to creativity.
It's amazing, this sort of twofold irony of this, right? That you were referring to this in a conversation earlier before we filmed. You know, the twofold irony. One is, right, Obama being a very liberal arts guy, is how humanities go when he speaks, yet is not supporting it. And then the irony of the fact that China, you know, is looking at us for the humanistic and liberal learning right at the time that, as you said before, that we're abandoning. Seem to be abandoned.
That's right, and they're doing so not because they love democracy.
Right, that's right, that's right.
They're doing so because they see that this is the way to produce fertile, creative minds of the sort that can actually innovate. And innovation, they see, is the key to economic success.
Your point about the social mobility and so forth is wonderful. Those of you who I know a lot of students who watch this have had, U.S. survey courses with me or with others, and in those courses we read things like Franklin's autobiography or Frederick Douglass's narrative, right, in which it's education, learning to read, learning to understand the world. Douglass is exposed to abolitionists for the first time and says, oh my gosh, there's people out there who think I should be free, and the way in which that creates this kind of desire for mobility and sort of really living what we might call the American dream. So this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us, and a lot of lessons that we could learn, and we will see you next time. Thanks again for watching the office hours.